Hello YouTubers, my name is Frederick Lopez and you are on a new episode of The Final Cut. In today's episode I'm going to be going over one of my favorite vampire films of all time and the film that kind of got me into vampires. We're going to go over 1994's Interview with a Vampire, based upon the novel written by Anne Rice from 1976 of the same name, Interview with a Vampire. So first I'm going to go over a brief synopsis, cast and crew, and then ultimately get into spoiler territories and what I like about the film and why I think it is great, and whether or not I think it makes the final cut. So first with the cast. Interview the Vampire stars Tom Cruise as Lestat de Lincourt and Brad Pitt as Louis de Pointe-du-Lac, Kirsten Dunst as Claudia, Antonio Banderas as Armand, Stephen Rea as Santiago, and Kristen Slater as Daniel Malloy, the interviewer. It is directed by Neil Jordan, who also directed recently Byzantium and also The Crying Game. And the screenplay was written by the author Anne Rice. And so yeah, what is Interview the Vampire about? Well, pretty much it is through the perspective of Louis. So pretty much it starts off in San Francisco. We're introduced to Louis, Brad Pitt's character, and he meets this man named Dale Malloy, who's Christian Slater's character. He wants to share his life to this person. And he's wondering where to start, whether it be like David Copperfield, I was born, I grew up. And he pretty much tells the story of his life ever since he became a vampire. Louis starts off really depressed at the beginning of his story. He just lost his wife and child and wants to die. And that is when the vampire Lestat, played by Tom Cruise, finds him and brings the dark gift to him. Gives him the choice that he never had. So after Lestat turns him, Louis throughout this journey goes through betrayal, loneliness, hunger, different things in his life, and ultimately it's a tale of loneliness and betrayal and what it means to be a vampire, to be an immortal. And Louis, after being undead, after wanting death at the beginning of the story, learns what it means to be alive and learns the value of life through being alive for over 200 years. So it's through the perspective of a vampire, which is Louis. And as a non-spoiler synopsis, that's pretty much it. It's pretty much the life of this vampire up to the point of where he's talking to the interviewer. And he wants to share his story to someone else, to enlighten them about immortality and life. And that is what makes this film so brilliant, is the fact that it's through the perspective of a vampire. And the novel really was a game changer, probably the most influential novel for vampire folklore since Bram Stoker's Dracula. Anne Rice puts you in the perspective of the vampire. He wasn't just a monster. The vampire was a person. The vampire was his individual, and you are put through his perspective. You sympathize with the vampire. And that is so brilliant, to go through the eyes of this monster. Maybe to him he's not a monster. Maybe he does feel like a monster. What goes on when somebody can live that long? How much they see, how much they go through. And that is what was brilliant about the novel, and it was brilliant about the film. And to me, this is one of the best vampire films of the 1990s. This and Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola, is like the best vampire films of the 1990s, in the way that Fright Night and The Lost Boys are the best vampire films of the 1980s. Now, getting into spoiler territory, there is a couple of differences. In the novel, Louis was getting over the death of his brother. He didn't have a wife and child, and Claudia was 5 years old instead of 12. In addition, Lestat had a father he was raising who was blind and needed Louis' plantation to have him stay there, and they don't mention his father or his past that's mentioned in the Vampire Lestat or the novel, so you don't get any of that information. In addition, in the Theater of the Vampires, you have Lestat confront Louis after Claudia dies. That's not in the film at all. He doesn't meet Lestat till he's back in New Orleans in the 20th century. So it's very different, but yet the same. And Anne Rice made some changes to the screenplay, which I think really help. It still remains true to the novel while taking some liberties, and I feel like those liberties don't affect the story in any way. It just makes it better for a film adaptation than it would for a novel, so to speak. It makes it more accessible for a film, and I think it works for a film. Also, David, the interviewer, gets bitten by Lestat and has a choice to become a vampire at the end, where before, in the novel, he just went to go find Lestat, and he doesn't become a vampire until Armand makes him in the Queen of the Damned novel, the third novel in the Vampire Chronicles. So there's some differences, and yeah, Paramount purchased the right to make Interview the Vampire back in the late 70s after it was made, and they were thinking of getting John Travolta at the time, but there were some other vampire movies that kind of stopped that from getting into production. But when Anne Rice was writing the novel, she had Rutger Hauer in mind, which is weird because he's in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Salem's Lot, so that's kind of cool. Anyway, time passed, and eventually David Geffen at Geffen Pictures and Warner Brothers got the rights, and they made the movie. And he thought, hey, instead of just getting a regular screenwriter, why don't I ask the author to write the film? And it was kind of a struggle for her to get back, remember what mind frame she was at when she wrote the novel, to write a screenplay, basically write the same story again. And they were at the 5th book at the time of the release of this movie, so they were on Mimnock the Devil. But ultimately, she did a fantastic job, and Neil Jordan's direction was superb, I thought. Everything was still done practical. Stan Winston had amazing effects with the veins, Claudia's death, the blood, everything was just top-notch, grade A material, and everything was done to the best possible quality they could get to at that time. Anyway, after Geffen Pictures got it, they got Neil Jordan. He just did The Crying Game, so they got him to direct Interview the Vampire. They got Antonio Banderas, and Daniel Day-Lewis was supposed to be Lestat, but then dropped out. So then they asked Johnny Depp, he declined, and they eventually got Tom Cruise, in which Anne Rice was really upset at the time, before she saw the film. Then she issued an apology, which, yeah, Tom Cruise really surprises me in this. This is one of his best roles. Him and Brad Pitt have the best roles in this film. I mean, all the actors do a superb job, but Tom Cruise, this is one of his best roles. And, you know, he needs to play bad guys more often with this and then Collateral, but definitely, this is one of those roles where you can't even tell it's Tom Cruise. He is the vampire Lestat. And River Phoenix was originally supposed to be the interviewer, but then he passed away, so then Christian Slater took upon the role of David the interviewer, and he gave some of his salary to 2 charities that River Phoenix supported. And then Brad Pitt was cast, and Brad Pitt does a fantastic job as Louis. You really get to feel his pain, and he plays a tragic figure. This goes along with some of Brad Pitt's best movies of the 1990s, along with his flawed characters and dark characters and roles such as ones in Meet Joe Black, 7 Years in Tibet, and Legends of the Fall. This one goes up there with them, and it's very early Brad Pitt in film. He really shows his capabilities as an actor in this film as Louis. Kirsten Dunst, one of her early roles, very great, very mature content for such a little girl, for such a young actress, and she handled it with grace and was perfect. And that also goes with Neil Jordan's direction. And then Antonio Banderas as Armand was fantastic. Yeah, Antonio Banderas is just Antonio Banderas, but he is kind of sinister in this. You don't know if he's good or bad, but he plays that line between light and darkness. And there's this one scene where there's this one scene where he moves his hand by a candle. He's like, "This is the only real evil left in the world." The way he said that was just amazing. And Stephen Ray really does a good job as Santiago. He adds a little bit of humor and more body acting, as far as just like movements, almost like a mime. But then he's also very evil. You really kind of despise his character. And there's some really heartfelt moments in here. Louis' past, him becoming a vampire, him having been betrayed Lestat, and then raising Claudia, and then Claudia afraid of losing him to Armand in the Theater of the Vampires. And then when she dies, when they put her out in the sun to kill her, and he gets there too late, you just see the effects. And they had a cast, and what they did is they pulled a string. Stan Winston and his team had a cast of Kirsten Dunst, the actress that played her newly turned vampiric mother. And they had a string, and they pulled it when Brad Pitt had his hands by there. And it was all practical effects for the ash. You just see his eyes, and a part of him dies. And it's great because when he's interviewing, when he's having the interview with David, you see him cry, and he says vampires can maybe cry once or twice in their lifetime. So it really, with the editing and everything, just makes you feel for him. And that revenge scene is one of the best revenge scenes. Again, kind of like Legends of the Fall. he just goes ape shit on them with a Reaper blade. The effects there where he cuts Santiago in half. Great stuff by Brad Pitt. The music, oh my god. Elliot Goldenthal did the music to this film. He later on did the score for Batman Forever, and yeah, his score is really dark and it's really good. And then I also like Sympathy for the Devil. The cover for that song done by Guns N' Roses at the end is perfect. Perfect segue for a would-be sequel that we unfortunately never had. But it's not just about like a good story and drama. It does have some scares. It does have some intensity. There's some wicked scenes. The part where they burn Lestat and he comes back from the swamp and he's just like playing the piano, talking about the blood of the alligators and snakes, and then he looks at Claudia and he's like, "You've been a very, very naughty little girl." That was crazy. Some of the stuff where he like kills people. He's like using rats to give blood to Louis. And how evil he is when Claudia's turned, when Louis bites her and he's just dancing with her mother's dead corpse. It's just sinister. And then the Theater of the Vampires also has a creepy vibe to it. They like basically get this woman, she's completely nude, and like a gang of vampires just brutally feed upon her. It is just some scary stuff, really. And it's not like done in a slasher horror way or like torture porn. It's just like primal gore, like just primal. It's more just like primal fear, where these are animals. And Tom Cruise, you can really tell, put a lot into this role. And speaking of animals, supposedly he looked at footage of zebras being attacked by lions and how lions would approach their prey. And you can kind of tell there's a very animalistic primal nature to Lestat when he gets vampiric. There's that flamboyant aristocrat we see from the novel, but then when he like basically shows his vampirism, he is a monster. He does get very, very brutal at times with no remorse. There's this line where he tells Louis, like, "God kills indiscriminately, and so shall we." It's just some evil stuff there. But he's more of an anti-hero, and you really feel for him more if you read the novels. They have about 12 or 13 sequels. But this film is a really well-made film. I mean, it is fantastic. The scene where Claudia feeds Lestat dead bodies and poisons him, and he's like, "Louis, put me in my coffin, put me in my coffin." It's like, "I picture your coffin, father." Slits his throat, and then he just bleeds out on the floor. It was just intense, and that was animatronics by Stan Winston. Again, great production of this film, and it was nominated for 2 Oscars. It didn't win any, but it was nominated for Best Original Score by Elliot Goldenthal, and then Best Art Direction. And it is a superb, well-crafted film, and the story is just amazing. Just like the novel, you really get to see the life of this vampire. What is it like to be an immortal? What is it like to be a vampire? One of the best vampire films. It puts you through the eyes, the perspective of a vampire, in this case Louis. And it has a feeling of like immortal films like Highlander, the original Highlander, where you get to see the flashbacks and the pain and everything this person has experienced and why they're the person they are today. It's just really tragic. It's a very somber yet well-crafted film. And that's why I think it makes a final cut. Interview the Vampire definitely makes a final cut as a horror film. But it's not really scary. It's in the horror genre since it's vampires. But I want to bring attention to this film for Halloween because it's not. It goes past the genre of horror. It goes past the genre of being a vampire film. This is a well-crafted motion picture. This is well-crafted film, period. One of the best films I've ever seen. It got me into vampires ever since I watched it when I was a kid. This is the reason why I love vampires. But the novel was well made by Anne Rice. I mean, there's a reason why. This is a 1994, 5 million copy bestseller, now a major motion picture. This is a game changer. This is as important to vampire literature as Bram Stoker's Dracula. There wouldn't be anything else with vampires the way it is now without Interview the Vampire, both the novel and film, I feel. So many vampire properties have taken a lot from the Anne Rice novels. And perhaps maybe that's why this film is good. Besides Neil Jordan doing some rewrites, Anne Rice was involved in the script. So it's almost like seeing Stephen King films in which he wrote for the movie. And you can tell there is that same level there. But I think Antonio Banderas said it best. This film, recent version, has introductions from Neil Jordan, Anne Rice, and Antonio Banderas. And he said, you could probably make 500 versions of Interview the Vampire, but you're not going to find one as strong and as well made and as close to the source material as this film would be. And I have to agree with him. There's a remake on the way, and I'm getting tired of remakes, but you almost have to remake it if you're going to have a different cast because you're going to make the other sequels. So I could understand, but this is going to be a hard film to beat. This is a really well-crafted film. And I know I said well-crafted a lot in this interview, but it's true. This film is as immortal as a vampire. And I love that ending with Tom Cruise and the Guns N' Roses Sympathy for the Devil, where it's just like, Louis, 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 always whining. You had enough of that? I had to listen to that for centuries. And he's like, I'm going to give you the choice I never had. And it ends with this smile, just so devious, Sympathy for the Devil and rock. And I wish they made the sequel to this. It's sad that they did not, with the vampire Lestat and him being a rock star, because that was a perfect ending. San Francisco Bridge. And speaking of San Francisco Bridge, the Golden Gate Bridge. This is the first movie to block the Golden Gate Bridge to film. And they blocked it so they can use 2 lanes, and they actually got that shot of Tom Cruise driving David's car. Great stuff there. Yeah, such a great ending and perfect song for the character of Lestat de Lincourt. But yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what else to say. There's some tragic parts, some exciting parts, and just seeing the vampire effects is just insane. But this is a well-crafted film. And they were going to make a sequel, and they never did. Neil Jordan was planning on making one. They never made it, and then the rights were running out. So what did they do? They went ahead and rushed the films and combined the second and third novels into Queen of the Damned. And Tom Cruise turned down the role of Lestat. So there is a sequel to Interview with the Vampire. However, it has much to do with Interview with the Vampire as Halloween 3 Season of the Witch has to do with Halloween 1 and 2, or like Lost Boys the Tribe has to do with the Lost Boys. So yeah, it's kind of a standalone feature, even though there is a sort of pseudo-sequel that has some of the same characters, but all different actors and crew and writers. So what is my score for Interview with the Vampire? Well, I already said it makes the final cut, and yeah, it's 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, and an A+. Interview with the Vampire is a cinematic masterpiece. If you've never seen Interview with the Vampire, go check it out, especially if you're into vampires and stuff. This is a well-crafted film, and like I said, it is the best 90s vampire film, along with Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola from 1992. Check out Fright Night, Lost Boys, this, and Bram Stoker's Dracula, most definitely. And it's one of the best vampire films, period. If we're moving past decades, this is seriously like in the top 5. And it was also the highest grossing vampire film for the longest time, for over a decade. It's not anymore, but it is the highest grossing R-rated vampire film of all time still. So I find that interesting. Anyway, yeah, that's kind of a quick review, but I just want to get my thoughts out there for Halloween. And if you haven't checked out Interview with the Vampire, totally check it out. I mean, where else are you going to find Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt, Kirsten Dunst, Christian Slater, and Antonio Banderas in the same film? And most of the actors as vampires. Like, that's just incredible. That's awesome. It's a damn good movie, and that is what Interview with the Vampire is. It's a damn good film. Again, cinematic masterpiece. Even here, USA Today, 4 stars, wicked fun. It casts a seductive spell. Drink for me and live forever. Interview with the Vampire Chronicles. 5 out of 5, 10 out of 10, and an A+. But yeah, definitely check it out. And whether you have or haven't, if you haven't, definitely check this film out, and then read the novel by Anne Rice and the rest of the Vampire Chronicles. They're fantastic, and Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles, Interview with the Vampire, is as pivotal to vampire literature as Bram Stoker's Dracula. So forget reading anything else. If you want to get into vampires, read Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice and Bram Stoker's Dracula. If you have checked it out, let me know. What are your favorite scenes? What did you like, didn't like about the film? Favorite moments? What did you think of Queen of the Damned and Interview with the Vampire? Do you like the book or the film better? Personally, I like both. And even though there is this book and there's some changes from the book, it doesn't make me mad. I don't get too mad about it. So they're both great in their own way. But yeah, definitely let me know. What are your favorite moments? And if you haven't checked it out, again, check out this cinematic masterpiece. That is all for today, YouTubers, for the final cut. I know this is very fast, but I just want to give my brief thoughts over Interview the Vampire. Definitely check it out this Halloween. And then tune in for the next episode of The Final Cut, in which I will review the inferior sequel to Interview the Vampire. Even though it can be considered a standalone feature, I will be reviewing Queen of the Damned from 2002. Anyway, that is all today, and yeah, enjoy it out there, and definitely check out Interview the Vampire. And if you've seen the movie or haven't, read a book and read Interview the Vampire. It's excellent, brilliant novel, a literary masterpiece, and a cinematic masterpiece. Check out Interview with the Vampire.